Obviously was part of the family group and they merged it and whatever else. So I think we'll hear a bit about it. So please join me in welcoming Brenton Whittenbury.
Thank you, Juliano, and thank you for inviting me along today. I was interested to hear the Hoffmans here because both his business and our business were inducted into the Family Business Association Hall of Fame last year. So, welcome, Phil, wherever you are. I can't see you there at the moment, but very good there. I'm not a Rotary member. As Juliano spoke, I've been involved with Scouts, another service organisation, of course. I came along to this lunch a couple of weeks ago as Juliano's guest, and I was very impressed with the camaraderie and the feeling within the group, and that has only been reinforced today. And to any guests that are here considering joining groups such as this or any service organisation, I can only recommend it for the valuable work that these groups do and for what you get out of it yourself. So please consider that. Today I'm going to try and give you an insight into not only our business but retail generally, and a little bit about the shoe business as well. We're a 6th generation business, and there's not too many of them around in South Australia. We've been trading since 1868. First of all, a quick bit of history. My great-great-grandfather, Thomas Judd, emigrated from England in about 1862. He was a cobbler and a bookbinder. He opened Judd Shoes at 262 Rundle Street in 1868. It's right down the east end of Rundle Street, and it's now occupied by our frescoes. Shoe stores in those days, of course, were quite different to what they are now. Thomas handmade shoes in a workroom out the back of the store and then sold them at the shop out the front on the street. They were generally made to order, and there was a very limited range kept in stock. So you'd go in, pick something out, he'd make it to your size, you'd go back a couple of weeks later and pick it up. As by contrast today, of course, there's very little shoe manufacturing in Australia, and just our business alone holds over $1 million worth of stock at any one point in time. Adelaide was once fairly much the centre of shoe manufacturing. We had Hush Puppies, Clarks, Harrisons down on Richmond Road there, John Frizz at Nord, Slatters, Dinah Ferrari, Rossiter's, R.M. Williams, all manufacturing here, and all but the last two have moved all their manufacturing operations to China now. Making shoes is a very labour-intensive process. You can go into the most modern shoe factory now and you'll still see rows of people sitting at sewing machines stitching upwards. So it's no wonder that most of that's gone to China. But good on Rossies and RMs for staying true and keeping their operations here. And they're prospering. I don't know how they do it really, but they're doing a good job. I can remember going into that shop when I was a kid in the late 60s, early 70s, and seeing machinery in there that was used 100 years earlier to make shoes. And it's really just a shame that back in the 60s and 70s we didn't have the same attitude to heritage as we do now. 262, as we knew it, was because it was 262 Rundle Street, traded continuously until 1978, when Rundle Street really started to change. The market had moved out, cafes were moving in, and that store closed. But some of you might remember businesses like Holbrook's Grain Store, Laylord's Butchers, Hambley Clark's Gun Shop, and of course the original Ruby's Cafe down there, that were all our neighbours at those times. And there is still one provider of those times. Frank's Barber Shop is still there, hidden around in Ebenezer Place, which I'm sure some of you have frequented over the years. In those days, of course, there were only two basic styles of men's shoes. There was the Oxford lace and the Derby lace. And does anyone know the difference between an Oxford shoe and a Derby shoe? Oh, I had a prize there. An Oxford shoe, I'll explain later, but I was going to get some shoes out. But an Oxford shoe comes to a point where it laces up. Derby shoe has the two flaps that come over and lace, and that was really the choice in those days. Anyway, Thomas Judd had a son, and that was Clary. Clary had a daughter, Vera. She married Stan Whittenbury, my surname. They were my grandparents. They had children, all worked in the business, and so here we are today, 6 generations later. We currently have 5 stores. Judd's at Glenelg, and that's the only Judd store that still trades now. So that we keep that one running pretty much because it's our original family name. We have Grundy's shoes in Rundle Street, which we purchased in the 20s. That was directly opposite Gerard Goodman's, and we have a Gerard here today that I've already met. So that's just on the corner of Synagogue Place there. We put that shop through a total revamp in 2010, and it's now looking really smart. Barlows in Rundle Mall, we purchased that in the 60s from the Barlow family. That's our main store now, obviously the best location, and that's the thing in retail. And we have 2 other Grundy stores opened in more recent years at Glenelg and Victor Harbour. So that's our stable of 5 shops at the moment. We turn over about 1,000 pair of shoes a week out of those 5 stores, which equates to around $5 or $6 million over a year, not a week. Fortunes have ebbed and flowed over the years, of course, with the big break coming in the 20s, when my grandfather, Stan Whittenbury, opened a revolutionary new shop called Judd's Shoes on the corner of Regent Arcade and Rundle Street. And that store was the first in Adelaide to showcase a variety of shoes off the shelf from a number of different manufacturers, where ladies could go into the shop, pick something off the shelf, try it on, buy it then and there, take it home with them. Right? Rather than having the cobbler out the back and having to come back later and pick them up. So I'm sure you can all understand it's no wonder that that concept worked. That ladies could go in, buy a pair of shoes and take them home. So that obviously took off, despite predictions within the industry that it wouldn't. You know, it's a revolutionary idea, who would think of doing that? Judd's on the corner of Regent Arcade became a bit of a fashion mecca for a lot of Adelaide ladies. A handwritten letter, which is actually dated 1946, describes how my grandfather Stan loaned a shoe factory in Melbourne an amount of money in exchange for preferential supply of the latest styles. Something that might raise the eyebrows of the ACCC today, I think, had that document floating around. But that was the way business was done then, of course, and I don't know whether that money was ever repaid or not. It's written in there that can be repaid at the earliest convenience, I think it says. In the early 1990s, the business had grown to 8 stores. We owned a lot of our premises, but we were also paying rent in Regent Arcade, City Cross, Costa Arcade and Tea Tree Plaza. Not a happy association with Westfield, they're tough landlords. Coupled with the Asian financial crisis at that time and the accompanying downturn, rent was really killing us, and the landlords were making much more money from those shops, those rented shops, than we were. So consequently, we made the decision to close those rented stores and only trade out of the properties that we own. A strategy that we still adhere to, and by doing that, it really gives us the edge over the competition. Retail rents are obviously very expensive. If we're paying rent in that shop in Rundle Mall at Barlows, we'd be paying probably about $3,000 a square metre annually there. So that would equate to probably about roughly $1,000 a day. So by not having to pay rent, it really frees you up and allows us to compete with national chains on service by having extra staff and also on price. We don't necessarily have to go for those really high margins that a lot of them do. And if it really, basically, if it wasn't for that advantage, we couldn't survive. Service is the big chance to stand out in retail, of course, in most businesses. And not only does it provide you with a point of difference over our competitors, but it gives customers a reason to shop in our store in person. So we need people with good communication skills and a genuine interest in people and the products they are selling. In short, like most businesses, we need people that care. And working in retail, it's a really great job. It's an opportunity to be involved with the fashion industry, which obviously a lot of people are interested in. It's a people business. There's always new products on the shelf. There's new customers to talk to about them. Some customers are challenging, of course. Some are downright rude. But most are a pleasure to serve and really appreciate our help. As in any industry, when you're dealing with the public, it's full of surprises. We get two chaps that come in together. One only has a right leg, one only has a left. Okay, they're both the same size. They come in and buy their shoes. So, you know, you come we get backpackers that come in and want to take photographs of their shoes, their old shoes, because they've got so many memories. You know, memories come in all different shapes and sizes. So they don't want to take the shoes with them because it's a travelling light, but they want those memories. We had a CID detective bring back some shoes one day because they were squeaking, and he was on a job, and he had to take his shoes off and walk around in his socks at the stakeout because his shoes were squeaking. So he's a customer that, get customers that come in to buy shoes for their. Some lady came in for a late husband to wear on his journey into the afterlife. So she wanted some shoes to put on him at the funeral home when she was dressing him up, and then conversely you get shoes returned because unfortunately the person that they were purchased for never got to wear them. And people buying slippers for family and hospital, shoes for weddings and other celebrations, kids getting dragged in over the holidays to buy school shoes. Nothing worse when you're a kid and mum dragging you in to get school shoes and you're trying to enjoy your holidays. But in retail you get to share all those stories and just become part of people's lives with only those few minutes, but it's far from a dead-end job, retailing. I think a lot of people see it a bit that way, but it really gives you a window to the world to just meet all of those people that come to the store. And I'm sure anyone that's worked in retail really enjoys that interaction. One day a fellow came into the shop and he sat down to try on some shoes, and I noticed that he had odd shoes on. They were two different styles. He was unaware of this, so I mentioned it, and obviously that clinched the sale. He didn't really have any choice from there but to buy what he was trying on. And that was an Xenophon. I did threaten to bring up a Sunday Mail or something and tell them at the time, but he's a good fellow, Nick, and a regular customer. There's been some great characters in the industry, none the least a fellow called Tony Bianco. Now, one of the ladies here, who's familiar with Tony Bianco? Anyone heard of that brand name? Oh, one gentleman put his hand up there, but on yourself for coming out. They manufactured ladies' shoes in Melbourne. They had one of those old factories, well, as I was explaining before, with rows of people sitting at sewing machines. And Christmas was coming up, and all the stock had gone out to the various retailers that I was providing before Christmas. But of course the money hadn't come in because the payments weren't due until the end of January. You work on a 30-day account. So there wasn't a lot in their bank account, and they had to pay all the Christmas wages. So Tony, being Tony, he's still around, Tony, they still run their business, they don't manufacture here anymore, but okay, what can I do? I haven't got enough money. So he put the money that he had on a horse, of course. So he gathers, everyone down tools, gathers around the radio, listens to this horse race. Are we going to get our Christmas pay or not? The horse comes in, of course, they get their Christmas bonus, he's still going, everything's sweet, and away they go. So in any industry you get those characters. There's the Rockport CEO. Rockport's a well-known American brand, which I'm sure many of you have worn, very comfortable shirt. And he ran a New York Marathon in a pair of these back in the early 90s, just to prove that Rockport had actually been able to combine the features of a sports shoe with the features of a dress shoe. It's a selling point that we still use in the shop today. publicity than to do something like that. I'm just going to run through a few brands that you're probably familiar with. Like most retailing, it's very brand driven, and some of the famous brands in shoes have quite interesting origins. Windsor Smith is a brand that I heard Sandra talking about from our table earlier, and it's an an Australian brand. Windsor Smith is still owned by the Mance family. I think they're into their 4th generation. And the name reflects the desire to appeal to all Australians, no matter what their background was. And so hence the combination of Windsor, being the royal name, and Smith. Okay, so Windsor Smith, that's how it came about. Hush Puppies, of course, is an American brand, and that's born out of a popular local metaphor for sore feet. So the Yanks refer to sore feet as barking dogs. So what better way of soothing those barking dogs than to slip on a pair of Hush Puppies? The term UGG is synonymous with sheepskin boots, of course, in Australia. So much so that despite the best efforts of some overseas raiders, an UGG name can't actually be registered in Australia as a brand name. The first UGG boots were just sheepskin, crudely wrapped around the feet of surfers on the Victorian surf coast, trying to keep warm in those chilly Victorian nights back in the early 70s. The local tannery around Lorne started making them into boots, and the surfers all started to call them UGG boots, which was a reference to their ugly appearance. In the mid-70s, the tannery sold the UGG name to an American-based company called Deckers, and that Deckers Corporation could see the potential to grow the UGG brand worldwide, which they have done. But UGG boots still continue to be manufactured around Australia, and their popularity went through the roof, and not only with the surf culture, but generally. And the original tannery still makes boots and brand them or sell them under the Emu name. So when you see a pair of Emu Uggs around the place, that is the original factory that came up with the UGG boot name. Deckers Corporation, the American company that bought the UGG name, opened factories in China and spent copious amounts of money promoting the UGG brand as being their UGG brand, UGG Australia, as being the original Australian UGG boot. Don't settle for an imitation, make sure you buy these, even though they're made in China. And most Americans and Europeans still believe that to be the case. This brand I have up here is a locally made one. Also, you'll notice branded UGG Australia. There was a court case famously a few years ago where Deckers took some local Australian UGG boot manufacturers to court. They wanted to extend their registration of the UGG name to include Australia, and they lost that case, which was a victory for all the UGG boot manufacturers here. And so anyone, you or I, or anyone could start a factory tomorrow making UGG boots and brand them UGG, because it's just a word. Deckers still hold the rights in the Northern Hemisphere, so any Australian manufacturers wanting to, that's their logo, the Deckers logo. Any Australian manufacturers wanting to export boots, UGG boots to the Northern Hemisphere has to use a different name. And the Emu have done that very successfully, and probably the second best recognised UGG boot brand around the globe. So we often get asked in the shop, are these UGG boots genuine? And that's the Deckers one, you'll notice with the big G in the middle. And the answer to are these UGG boots genuine, my answer is always, well, it depends on your definition of genuine. If you want 100% Australian made, 100% pure sheepskin, if that's your definition of genuine, we have that. But unfortunately, a lot of tourists particularly want the UGG Australia logo that they recognise, made in China, such as the power of advertising. Now, UGGs, how are we going for time, Julie? Now, UGGs may be ugly, but they've got nothing on Crocs. These were invented by two Canadian adventurers that ran a whitewater rafting business in Boulder, Colorado. They needed a shoe that their clients could wear in the rafts that weren't affected by water. They floated, they drained easily, and they're relatively cheap. So they invented these things, marketed them worldwide. They became the biggest growing footwear company in the world at the time. And even the lady that, if any of you watch Oprah, even the lady that invented the little jewels that go in the holes to decorate them is now a multi-millionaire. The Sperry boat shoe is another one that was born out of necessity. Now, if any of you have boat shoes, you'll notice if you look at the sole of them when you get home, they've got these little lines, little wavy lines in the sole there. You might just be able to pick up in that photo. And Mr. Sperry was walking his dog I think he was Canadian as well, at least North American, on a frozen lake one day, and he couldn't stand up. His dog was running around on the ice, no problem. And he thought, well, how come the dog run around and not slip over where I'm struggling? So he looked at the dog's paws, and it had little lines, little slits in the paws, just like he's put in his shoes. And he thought, okay, if I can make a pair of shoes with those lines in it, then maybe people won't slip over when the water boat ramps on boats and things. He did that, and now Sperry is the biggest selling boat shoe, best recognised branded boat shoe in the world. All of the brands I've spoken about have been successful, but there's only one shoe that can claim to be the most successful and the biggest selling shoe in the world ever, and that's the Converse Chuck Taylor, which a lot of us would know as gym boots from when we were kids, and that's really the big one. There's been over 1 billion pairs of those sold throughout the world. In my office, I have a photo of a jam-packed Rundle Street taken in the 20s. Everyone is wearing a hat, you'll notice in that photo. And people often comment, say, gee, wouldn't you like we were selling hats in those days? But if that photo, of course, was taken today, there'd be nowhere near the number of hats being worn, but everyone would still be wearing shoes, okay? So rest assured that we're going to be around for some time, and we're looking forward to celebrating our 150th anniversary in a few years. Thank you.
We have time for a few questions. Do you have any questions from the floor?
Thank you for your talk. Very, very interesting. I well remember our grandmother, who was probably buying Barlows handmade shoes for Gus at the turn of the century, and to a lesser extent, our mother. Their feet were confined in these tiny, pointy little shoes, and it gave support to a pretty big chiropodist industry, because they all had these cramped toes, the big toes that come across, and the little toes done up like a walnut, and they must have been the most uncomfortable shoes that you could ever imagine. And my grandmother would limp around, and she had all these shoes. A lot of other people may remember the same. Any comments?
Well, you could say that we've always had a close association with podiatrists. In fact, there used to be a podiatrist in the basement of Barlows years ago. My only comment there would be I've never worn those particular pointy-toed high-heel shoes that you refer to, and it might be best to pose a question to some of the ladies here as to how they get by with them. It does. Some of the heels we have in the store and some of the toe shapes, you do wonder how people get around in them, but they sell, and I guess you're just meeting that demand.
Thanks very much for a fascinating address. So my question is an extension of John's. You must have seen changes in the sort of physiology of people over the years. Because I'm aware of the fact that there was a major survey, an anthropometric survey done a couple of years ago, which was mapping people's feet for the Defence Force, and that data apparently was very highly sought after. In other words, people's feet have changed in size and shape and so on over time. Do you see that in the business, or?
Yeah, certainly when I first started working, which was in the early 80s, the average men's shoe size was probably about 7.5. And the average now would be probably about a 10, 9.5, 10. So feet have certainly grown. We're finding that we're stocking up to size 16s now. Whereas the largest size back early 80s was been probably 11 and maybe a very occasional 12. Yeah. So yeah, people's feet, along with people's height and everything else, has certainly grown. Yeah. Which I think you put down to food.
It's chicken, isn't it? Almost.
Unfortunately, I can see President Brian getting ready, so I think I'm going to wrap up. Okay, well, thank you for those who are about to, and thank you, Brenton, if you can. Now, from Brenton's earlier comments in his speech about Rotary, indicate to me that we might be seeing more of Brenton in the near future. Anyway, Brenton certainly gave us a window in the world, a window to the world of people and shoes in his talk. He enlightened us on the industry, the customers, the products, the brands, and we learned a bit about one of our members that sits over there, didn't we? Anyway, please join me in thanking Brenton as I present him with the customary pep